Hello, everyone. Thanks, Matt, for hosting me. My name is Jonathan Egilo. I'm the president and CEO of AXO Copper Corp. We are a company coming out with a new IPO in the next week. And our project is the Huerta Copper Project in Jalisco, Mexico. And we differentiate ourselves by being a recently past producing, high-grade copper story. And our job now is to figure out at what scale it should be restarted at, because it has some unique grades. And now we have to figure out how big it is. And that's effectively the goal for the next 12 or 18 months as an exploration company.
Jonathan, great to meet you. We've not met or spoken before, so thanks for coming on the show. Well, let's start with you. Who are you? What have you done before relative to what you're trying to do now, I guess?
Yeah, sure. So I stepped into this role as president and CEO 12 months ago. Before that, my background was in capital markets and mining. So I spent several years as an equity research analyst, working for Desjardins Capital Markets. Before that, National Bank Financial, covering a range of equities ranging from exploration stage copper, exploration stage gold, all the way up to mid-tier copper, mid-tier gold producers. And before that, my background was in mining engineering. So I actually worked for Detour Gold. So I have a technical background.
Okay, interesting. And where are you in terms of this listing? Is it closed?
Yeah, it's close. So we are actually expected to be closing and then listing next Wednesday, which I believe is June 4th. So the listing and initial trade will be either on June 4th or imminently shortly thereafter.
Okay. Well, congratulations on the youngest companies on the exchange. It doesn't last long, not in this market, I suspect. Right, you've also taken the opportunity to raise some money at this stage, and we'll talk about the uses of that capital in a second. But I'm interested in what you did pre-listing. You ran this as a private company before you did this, didn't you?
Yeah, correct. I can take you to a bit of the background of the company, kind of
That'd be cool.
30,000 foot level. So, around 2017 or 2018, there was a local Mexican family that effectively discovered high-grade outcropping copper at surface in their own backyard. And they started mining it, right? So they built a small 250 ton per day sulfide flotation plant near their hometown. And they were, mining La Huerta ore, or I guess mineralized rock, grades between 4 and 5% for about 3 or 4 years. And the way we got our hands on the project is, of course, you can see that our executive chair is Glenn Jessam. We share an overlapping board with members of not only Silver Tiger, but also Go Gold. So we have a deep team in country, and in particular in Jalisco, where Go Gold's asset is based off of. So we had a relationship with the family. We knew someone who was buying the concentrate off of the family. And we saw the grades and what they had done, it immediately piqued our interest, because it was clear that they found something incredibly unique, but they didn't necessarily care much for exploration. They were making good money as a private Mexican family, but they weren't necessarily seeing any kind of, or care about any kind of bigger picture, right? So that's where we stepped in and thought, okay, well, they're mining at a small rate today. At what rate should this deposit actually be mined at to generate more meaningful and larger scale cash flow? And what's the capital required? What are the steps required? Basically figure out the scale of the deposit so that, it can be mined and producing at, scale that would properly fit it. But the step right now is to figure out how big is it, because they've effectively done a 3 or 4 year, what I would consider like a bulk sample derisking process for us. And the next step is to see what it should be kind of restarted at.
Okay, let's talk about the transaction first in terms of, where you picked it up and who you picked it up from. What does that transaction look like?
Yeah, so there was initial upfront payment of $1.6 million US. That was done in 2022. And then it was $9.5 million US of staged payments over 5 years. So we're about $4 million into those payments to date. And the family also gets 5 million shares of the company, again, spread over in a 5-year sequence. And a bit of a unique component of this deal is that there's no royalties associated with it. So it's a royalty-free package.
Okay. And talk to me about the money that was put in pre the IPO, because it sounds like you've raised a chunk of money then as well.
Yeah, so initially, when we didn't know much about the project, there was a $5.5 million raise Canadian that was done in 2022, funded some of the first due diligence work and also the initial purchase. And then in 2023, we raised about $9 million, well, $9.5 million roughly, Not funded AXO's first drill program.
Right. Okay. So let's just kind of look at the data that you inherited and picked up just in a bit more detail, if you don't mind, and then talk to me about the kind of drill program you ran pre-IPO again.
Yeah. The data we inherited, there was a round of drilling done by the previous concession holders. Actually, wasn't necessarily too much step out. It was a lot of confirmation before where they were looking to mine. But we did pick up the core for that, and we're seeing results. We re-assayed the core ourselves, right? So it's good data. Looking at getting hits in the range of 14 meters, running kind of 5% copper. That would be one of our wider intervals. But generally, we were kind of seeing more of the same of several meters at the kind of grades that we knew that they were mining. And then in 2023, we started spending, we started our first drill program late 2023 and in 2024. And that's when we started stepping out a little bit more around the area where the family was mining. We've drilled down to about 200 meters below surface now. And that's when we're still hitting grades of, 9.5 meters at 7%. Those are some of our highlight holes, but really what we see in the deposit is there's generally quite a high grade, 3, 4, 5, 6 meters in the center. And then there'd be an alteration, or I guess slightly lower grade, that can be 10 meters in the hanging wall, 10 meters in the foot wall, which that lower grade stuff can be 1%, maybe a bit under 1%. So sometimes you get these intervals of, 20, 25 meters at 1.5% copper, but there will be a higher grade, 5 meters at 4%, something like that.
Okay. So the core which you got hold of, you re-assayed that. You've done some sort of confirmatory drilling to make sure that this historic data is as advertised. This new drilling that you're going to be doing with the recent raise, I mean, what does that look like, and what are you actually chasing?
Yeah, so we're going to be doing 15,000 meter program on the back of this raise, and really we have in and around where the family was mining, they only took off about 200 meters of strike length of the surface, and they took it down only about 40 or 50 meters, right? So it was kind of this very small surface expression, but we have traced it, for 5 kilometers at surface, this steeply dipping copper sulfide system, and there's this about 1.5 kilometer section that's in our presentation where we are going to focus on first, as where most of the work has been done. It's from a target all further south called El Aguila up to Punta Cornelio. And then right around in the middle of that is where we have the family's former operation known as Las Marias. So that's going to be the bulk of the focus of the program, is defining that strike extent. And then also, of course, with the deepest drilling being 200 meters below surface, we have no indication as to why this copper system wouldn't be deeper. And an obvious place is for us to step out and start throwing some drill holes that are 350, 400 meters below surface. So that would be, call it 70% of the 15,000 meter program would be around this 1.5 kilometer strike extent. And then we also have more regional targets that screen that they need follow-up drilling on. So there's La Huerta South. We found some copper expression at surface in the range of, so far 6% in a different looking system. We have high-grade copper in some limestone contacts with andesite where we're seeing, 3, 4, 5% copper. There's a couple other targets that aren't as perfectly defined or well understood as Las Marias, and where the family has done their former operation, but they screen that they need follow-up drilling. So we're going to have a budget in place to test some of these targets that have never seen a drill before.
Right. And okay. Can you sort of talk about the controls what you understand of the controls at the moment? I think you talked in the PowerPoint about dike geometry, or what do you know about structural features or host lithology, etc.
Yeah. So it is structurally controlled, right? So the main system that we've been hitting so far is a steeply dipping copper sulfide dike that is piercing through andesite. That's where we're seeing, the several meters of high grade at time. Now, an obvious question, since we've been looking at the deposit, is this, that's not a typical copper deposit. So the question comes in, what is the origin and what is the genesis of the system, right? That's also a focus of this upcoming drill program is, just where is this high grade copper coming from? And there's, current thesis is that, it's probably some sort of copper porphyry district. Now, that doesn't mean that we're looking for, 0.4, 0.5%, or even 0.3% low grade copper porphyry. But understanding the source of the system and where the copper is coming from, because a lot of these districts, they start out as mining high grade copper. So these copper porphyry districts, further north in Sonora, where Canada and Grupo Mexico is mining right now, actually 100 years ago, they were mining 5, 6, 8% copper, right? That was through these high grade dikes and these breccia systems. But that, was all mined out 100 years ago. And now Grupo Mexico has transitioned to 0.35% bulk lower grade copper, right? So it's almost like we're in this area and this district that hasn't been historically explored very well. It's under a lot of cover. There are a couple rationales and reasons as to why we feel like it hasn't really been explored. But, could we just be in the earlier stage of a copper district and we're finding some of the best grades that these more mature districts would have mined out, a century ago.
Right. And like, I always think these drill programs are about, setting expectations at the beginning, because you're trying to understand what's happening underground, right? So how do you kind of, in terms of like that, you've partially answered it, but in terms of understanding mineralization at depth, or trying to understand if there's any cross-cutting faults, or disrupting the continuity with, like, say, within, like, say, the Las Marias system, so how's the drilling being, and I guess the money being apportioned to answer specific questions around understanding what you're looking at?
Most of what we're seeing so far is that, in particular around that 1.5 kilometer area of focus, there are cross-cutting faults where you can see the main dike, sometimes it'll hop 50 meters north, sometimes it'll hop 50 meters south. So there are these cross-cutting dikes, but we do have the added benefit of, this isn't blind to us. It's extending towards surface, right? So we have a pretty good idea that the faults that are cross-cutting are probably important. We know they're important, but we also, we're not necessarily going in blind as to pick up the new system and looking for, just drilling down into blind because we see its expression at surface. So, I'd say portioning out the money spent, we have the added benefit where drilling at depth and trying to find the source of the system, in particular, if there's, breccia pipes down there, we have the benefit where we can take some of these risks and drill for this like home run style drilling. Because if you hit a breccia, historically, maybe we go from hitting 4, 5, 6 meters of high grade at a time to like 60, 70, 80 meters at a time, right? These breccias are generally wider systems, but we have the added benefit where we can keep stepping out along the known system in the dike and hopefully keep hitting several meters of high grade at a time and kind of use that to vector in to the source. So we're not just taking home run shots and coming up with dusters and swings and misses. We can actually build high grade tonnage on the way to, understanding what the system actually is, and then maybe hit, breccia or some kind of porphyry system deeper.
Okay, so you kind of got these kind of alteration halos and host rock mineralogy helping with that vectoring in on the high grade. What are the kind of key differences between the mineralization styles at Las Marias versus some of the regional targets like La Huerta South?
Yeah, generally the mineralization that we're seeing at Las Marias, it's very simple. It's chalcopyrite and boronite. So obviously, sometimes we get these intercepts are 1 to 2, 3 meters at a time that are 20% copper, right? That's when we start seeing heavy boronite, but generally it's associated with chalcopyrite. That's basically what we've been hitting so far. We have been finding mineralization further south, about 3 kilometers away further south, that is going to warrant a drill probably sometime in the middle of this summer. That is about 6% copper at surface. That's a little bit different in the sense that it's not hosted in a dike, it's actually hosted in a fault in some kind of structure, but again, it's predominantly seeing chalcopyrite, which is kind of interesting because, we're not talking about some kind of high grade copper equivalent, right? This isn't lumping together copper, lead, zinc, gold, silver, which can come with a whole range and suite of payabilities and recoveries, and you're producing individual concentrates and maybe a doré. Like it's a lot more simplistic than that. It's just straight copper. And we know it recovers well, and we know it pays well because the person who was buying the concentrate.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. What and with regards to we're talking talked a lot about drilling here, but in terms of integrating IP geophysics data, or quite frankly, good old trenching and surface sampling as well. Certainly, particularly around outside Las Marias. How much work are you doing on that this year?
Yeah, right now we're actively trenching and sampling.
Right.
Like we're
Okay.
doing things. So I'll actually explain. You raised the point about IP geophysics. We have ran IP geophysics along the property, and so far it's been proven successful. I mean, that's how we found some of these more recent discoveries. And geophysics I always find interesting because it generally, a lot of times, and especially with juniors, I can find it can be heavily misleading as honestly more of like a promotional tool, right? You see a big, beautiful, colorful bullseye, and you drill right in the middle of it, and it's a duster, and people are upset as to why. And it's like, well, geophysics, if you're not laying on geophysics with already a known discovery and seeing how they correlate, it can be heavily misleading. I mean, I think there's a joke, I'll probably butcher it, but a geophysics and a geologist are talking to each other, and the geologist asks the geophysicist, like, what does it mean? And the geophysicist says, well, what do you want the geophysics to tell you? And it's like that situation happens. So we have the added benefit where our IP and geophysics signatures light up best associated with Las Marias, right? So we already have the known discovery. We layer on top IP on top of it to make sure it's validating. It does validate it. And then you expand IP over the rest of the project, the rest of the property, to see what lights up. And, that's one of, the spots that lit up was 3 kilometers further south. And we went there, and it was under a lot of cover, but we found some outcrops, and we were getting 3% copper, 5% copper. And it was kind of validating what we were seeing. So we're in an area down there right now where, yes, we've evolved from chip sampling, which the discovery was earlier this year, to now trenching it. And we'll, I expect we'll be drilling it sometime this summer. But, the geophysics is actually validating with what we already know. It's not just a blind tool for, it's historically been used for promotional purposes for some companies, but it's working for us to generate new discoveries.
Yeah. And I guess with the kind of the fault offsetting as well, yeah, you got to do that. So in terms of are you looking at kind of drilling fans or systematic kind of step outs? I mean, how do you look at it?
This also ties in the question that we get asked, like in terms of like, well, are you doing resource drilling right now? When's the resource coming out? And I honestly think right now I look at like, what's the best bang for a buck in terms of money spend? How do we spend the next $5, $7, $8 million of drilling and turn that into, perceived market value on the results of like, 100, 200, 300 million? Like, what's actually the best bang for your buck in spending money in these early stages? And I don't think it's necessarily being incredibly conservative. I think right off the bat, you have to figure out what you have on your hands and figure it out sooner rather than later. And you can't do that by only, taking exclusively small little baby steps and drilling into the same little postage stamp over and over. So yeah, I mean, we'll be doing fan drilling, but slightly wider space. And then in particularly stepping out further north along the dike, at Las Marias, because, we have the added benefit where we can step out along strike, at 20, 30, 40 meters at a time in terms of strike length. And, we don't have to be drilling 1 kilometer long holes or $1 million holes, because we know that the expression is at surface. So we can be drilling 100 to 150 meter holes in areas that haven't been drilled, and, hopefully still hit the system and add tons that way. There will be a time, I'm sure, where, you have to drill these 600-700 meter long holes to bulk it out further at depth. But right off the bat, if it's expression at surface and we don't have drilling in the area, it makes far more sense to do these shorter, more shallow holes stepping out along strike.
Right. Okay. I think earlier in this conversation, you seemed to intimate that some work had been done for you in terms of this bulk work, been done for you, which helps you answer the question of how do we get this thing into production? And I think that's a sort of trend in the market at the moment, with companies having to find a narrative to kind of get noticed and say, look, we think we're a near-term production type story. Clearly, this is early days for you guys, but what is your attitude to mining? Are we drilling to the edge of the envelope, Canadian style, or are we trying to find a mechanism which gets into revenue at whatever time frame you set out? How does this work for you?
Yeah, we're thinking more in terms of mechanism to get into revenue, right? The idea of perpetually drilling forever. Well, first of all, we have the added benefit, I feel like, where we can differentiate ourselves in the industry by having a project that conceivably could be built and developed by a junior or by a developer, right? I mean, when you're drilling off a porphyry, your only real option is to drill it off and then progress through the studies and then hope that a senior comes in and buys the project off of you, because you can't conceivably finance, $3, $4, $5 billion on your own. So one of our best differentiating factors here is, I don't know what the scale of this should end up being, but it's not going to be a $3 billion porphyry build. It'll be some kind of bulk underground mine. So yes, the idea is to actually do the work here to figure out what could be best put back into production, and not necessarily just drill it off for all of eternity, grow it forever, and then hope that you get taken out.
Yeah. That's the hopium, they call it, don't they? Just looking at where you are, you're down. Where are you again?
We're in Jalisco State. Yeah, so we're down in Jalisco State on the west coast of Mexico. Yeah.
Okay, quite near the coast. And who's around you? Who do we have heard of?
Yeah, so I mean, we're in the same state as GoGold's Los Ricos,
right?
Of course. And then
further north, though.
Yeah, they're further north than us, so they'd be northwest of Guadalajara. We'd be southwest of Guadalajara.
Right.
We're closer to the border with Colima. Actually, the closest mine to us is only about 7 kilometers away, and it's a massive open pit, actually iron ore mine. It's ran by ArcelorMittal, the big steel conglomerate, and we benefit a lot from their infrastructure. And to get to site is quite simply, you fly into Manzanillo and you take highways and gravel roads for about an hour, or I guess an hour and a half, to La Huerta. Manzanillo itself is where ArcelorMittal does all of their direct shipping of the iron ore. They have an iron ore pelleting plant. Really all the goods from the Pacific Ocean coming into Guadalajara and Mexico City actually go through the port of Manzanillo. It's a massive port and major industrial area that we're kind of based out of.
Right. And given you've got mine builders on, as in, meaningful shareholders, shall we say, and obviously Glenn's association with not just Silver Tiger, but with Go Gold, how does that shape and form your thinking in terms of this kind of expedited, this aggressive mentality, this ambitious mentality of yours, because they've worked in Mexico for decades. How are they helping kind of with the setup of this as a company that could get into production? Because it's going to be looking at how does it facilitate that process, not just with the finances, which you're very strong at, presumably, but having the use of infrastructure, as you've said, but partners, to build something like this out.
There's, it's no coincidence that we're in the same state as Go Gold, and obviously major founding shareholders and overlapping board with Go Gold, right? They're kind of that group is the founders and the one who found it. So of course, with that comes all the shared expertise and shared personnel, right? There's things that AXO has already been able to do in Jalisco that, I wouldn't have been able to do on my own as a Canadian, where, it really has to be a Mexican company with very smart and just Mexican people on board, which is what comes with our group of companies, right? So even the ability to, this family, when we picked up the project in 2022, wasn't looking to sell, right? We found them, and it was actually about a year long of negotiation process with a local Mexican family. And that's something that our team in Mexico was able to do. We've signed an agreement with the local ejido for surface access rights. The local ejidos, ours, fortunately, very friendly, easy to deal with, mining friendly. There's a lot of mining in the area, but even just the ability to sign an agreement with the local ejido is something that, as our group and having local Mexicans down in Mexico who effectively run things for us in country, right? That's what we do. That's what we get, right? Myself, Glenn, Brad Landale, CEO of Go Gold, we're all Canadian or in Mexico all the time. But really, when you're down there, especially with things like signing agreements for Ejido, it has to be Mexicans deal with Mexicans, right? Or signing an agreement to pick up a project off a local family. That's Mexicans dealing with Mexicans, right? That's not me as a gringo going down there and trying to get things done, right? So yeah, we all benefit from each other off of the same group of people in Mexico.
Right. So if I said to you, look, we get lots of copper companies come on and talk to us, and lots of copper companies come and ask me for money. What differentiates you? I get the high grade, but that in itself is not enough. So what is it about your company who says I need to buy your stock?
Well, it's really the kind of vision behind what is built Go Gold and what has built Silver Tiger in the past, right? And it's no coincidence that when we're looking for copper in Mexico, and the project that we found is something that we can advance ourselves, and we can end up advancing it at a rate that we want to do, which is fast, and we don't paint ourselves into a corner where we're at the position where ultimately all these companies end up in the position, developers, where you either have to build it yourself and you have to sell. If your only option is you have to sell to a major, you've painted yourselves into a corner, and the future of the company is in someone else's boardroom, right? So of course the grade is our differentiating factor here, but it's not just the grade, it's the grade that allows us to go forward with a business plan where really we can build this ourselves. That's the end goal here.